When Jefferson Joseph DeBlanc entered Guadalcanal, the United States had been fighting a defensive campaign against Japanese attempts to retake Henderson Airfield and dominate the surrounding seas. Cruising at a low altitude over the Japanese-held island of Kolombangara, Second Lieutenant Jefferson J. DeBlanc investigates his instrument panel and his wristwatch. It's getting late, the sun is beginning to set, and he knows his return window to land safely is disappearing as fast as his remaining fuel. Suddenly, a bullet from a tailing Nakajima Ki 43 Oscar blasts the watch off his wrist, sending DeBlanc into evasive maneuvers. Twisting and turning, the armor plating of his F-4F Wildcat, and a lot of luck are the only things keeping him in the air as he tries to escape the enemy pilot. DeBlanc's luck runs out, however, as a series of bullets destroy his propeller, forcing him to bail out over the ocean. Floating to shore, an exhausted DeBlanc finds himself captured by natives and traded to a friendly tribe for a sack of rice. Most people cannot price out the amount of money they are worth, but I know exactly how much I am worth, DeBlanc would later note. 1 10-pound sack of rice. 1. Destined to fly. Jefferson Joseph DeBlanc was born a railroad breaker's son in Lockport, Louisiana, on February 15, 1921. From an early age, a young DeBlanc was transfixed by airplanes, recalling an encounter with a barnstorm pilot. Lifted me up for a quick look into the cockpit. I was transfixed by the instrument panel with its gauges, dials, switches. As it turned out, this was truly a defining moment in my life. 2. DeBlanc eagerly waited for his chance to fly, poring over stories of flying aces in World War I, memorizing their names, and learning their tactics. In 1939, at the age of 18, his chance came. As Europe became consumed by war, the U.S. military began to mobilize in preparation for an inevitable conflict. Noticing a deficiency in trained pilots, an initiative was launched to expand civilian air training. The Civilian Pilot Training Act permitted colleges nationwide to offer flying courses to civilians and allowed DeBlanc to get a start at Southwestern Louisiana Institute, now University of Louisiana at Lafayette. He enlisted in the U.S. Naval Reserve as a Seaman Second Class in July 1941 and received flight training at the Naval Reserve Aviation Base in New Orleans and the Naval Air Station in Corpus Christi, Texas. 3. In May 1942, DeBlanc was commissioned a second lieutenant in the U.S. Marine Corps Reserve and traveled to join the 2nd Marine Air Wing stationed in San Diego. There he would learn to fly the F-4F Wildcat, the standard carrier fighter at the time, before departing for the Pacific. DeBlanc and others in his section received only 9 hours of flying time in their new planes, along with minimal survival, night flying, and gunnery training, for making their next assignment on Guadalcanal, codenamed Cactus, a true trial by fire. The battle for Guadalcanal. At this point, the Japanese offensive was in full swing. Alongside the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, massive offensives were launched throughout the Pacific. French Indochina, British Malaya, the Dutch East Indies, the Philippines, Wake, and Guam all quickly fell against the seemingly unstoppable Japanese Empire. The time was at hand to halt this rapid advance before the Pacific was lost entirely. Critical naval battles in the Coral Sea and at Midway showed that the Japanese could not only be dueled but be beaten on the water, and soon their might on the land would be tested as well. As Japanese forces reeled after their defeat at Midway, Admiral Ernest King, commander of the U.S. Navy in the Pacific, decided to go on the offensive. On August 7, 1942, Marines landed on the island of Guadalcanal with minimal resistance, soon establishing a presence and moving toward their primary objective, an airfield located further inland. The Japanese noose around Australia could hopefully be loosened by seizing the island and projecting power in the Solomons. As the operation developed, both sides knew that Henderson Airfield and the coming air war would be decisive in the ensuing battle. 5. When DeBlanc entered Guadalcanal, the Marines on the ground and his squadron, VMF 112, had been fighting a defensive campaign against Japanese attempts to retake the airfield and dominate the surrounding seas. Soon, American forces began to pursue a retreating enemy. The big fight. As Japanese troops began to slip away, DeBlanc would prepare for the most exciting dogfight of his life. The big fight was on Sunday, January 31st, 1943, as 12 SBD, 3 dive bombers, escorted by a handful of fighters, were ordered to strike a fleet 250 miles away from Guadalcanal. 6. At 3 p.m., DeBlanc boarded his assigned plane, the F-4F Wildcat Impatient Virgin, and took off after the slower dive bombers. As the escorts flew over the Solomon Island of Bangura, DeBlanc immediately ran into trouble, as his experimental wing fuel tanks had issues connecting to the plane's engine, forcing him to rely on his relatively small internal tank. This would come back to haunt him. Almost immediately after the dive bombers finished their run, a pair of Japanese F-1 MP floatplanes began to chase the vulnerable bombers, who called for help. Coming in from a dive, DeBlanc opened up on the first Pete, knocking it into a fiery tailspin despite the defensive fire from the tail gunner. He then effortlessly nailed the tail of the second floatplane, taking some heat off the thankful bombers. The coast was not yet clear, however, as DeBlanc and his impromptu wingman, Sergeant James Felleton, noticed 10 Nakajima Ki, 43 Oscar fighters, often mistaken for the Mitsubishi A-6M0, heading their way. Luckily, the two pilots were about 500 feet below the advancing enemy, affording them the element of surprise. Approaching the squadron leader from below, DeBlanc pulled the trigger on his machine guns, causing the lead plane to explode in a massive fireball and the rest to scatter in confusion. He quickly dispatched the enemy wingman, who was attempting to dive a roll away and get a better understanding of the situation. This started one of the wildest dogfights I had ever been in, DeBlanc noted. To this day, I cannot tell how many zeros came down on us. 7. DeBlanc and Felleton used a popular tactic among American flyers called the thatch weave to dispose of the next two tailing fighters. This maneuver sought to make up for the Wildcats' low maneuverability by using a pair of Wildcats to take out a more agile plane. As a Japanese plane began to tail one of the Wildcats, both planes would break into a wide figure-8 pattern that converged on itself, allowing the free plane to have a clean shot of the enemy. As the skies cleared once more, the dive bombers reassembled and began the trip back home. DeBlanc's day, however, was not yet done. 2 more Oscars approached, and with limited fuel, he made the decision to draw the 2 planes away from the bombers and put himself in danger. Coming from a low approach vector, DeBlanc and one of the Japanese planes engaged in a head-to-head duel, with DeBlanc's angle and superior firepower allowing him to ignite the enemy long before he was in range. The determined Oscar kept coming despite its peril and threatened to ram the Wildcat. Squeezing on the trigger as tightly as ever, the plane's machine guns caused the Japanese plane to explode, throwing debris and oil all across DeBlanc's fuselage. With another plane on his tail, DeBlanc sank to a low altitude in an attempt to get the enemy plane to overshoot his trajectory. Bullets bounced off his Wildcat's armor plates as he bombed and weaved above the glistening Pacific. In an incredibly skilled maneuver, DeBlanc chopped his throttle, dropped his flaps, and managed to get behind the speeding Oscar. Lining up his sights and squeezing the trigger, DeBlanc scored his 5th confirmed kill of the day, making him one of a few aces in a day. DeBlanc soon found himself at the end of his luck after his encounter with another Oscar left him stranded on an island of natives in enemy territory. Landing in the sea, DeBlanc discovered that he was badly wounded in the back, arms, and legs, and that he was a long way from shore. 9. He would spend 2 days with untreated wounds living off coconuts before being discovered and traded to friendly tribes, with another 15 days passing before he could be taken to a U.S. Navy hospital. Returning home. DeBlanc returned home to recover, as the U.S. military continued to push the Japanese out of the Solomons before launching attacks on further Japanese strongholds. Upon his return to the Pacific, now Captain DeBlanc would participate in these offensives, seeing combat during the Marshall Island campaigns until May 1945. 10. From there he fought at and around Okinawa and the Ryukyu Islands until the end of the war, bagging his last kill there. With 9 confirmed kills, DeBlanc was transferred to Seattle and returned home to Louisiana on December 31, 1945, after the Japanese surrender earlier that year. On December 6, 1946, DeBlanc was invited to the White House by President Harry S. Truman to receive the Medal of Honor for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. 11. In addition to the Medal of Honor, DeBlanc received the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Air Medal with 4 gold stars in lieu of 2nd through 5th award, Purple Heart, a Presidential Unit Citation with 1 bronze star, the Asiatic Pacific Campaign Medal with 3 bronze stars, the American Campaign Medal, and the World War II Victory Medal. 12. After the war, DeBlanc earned a bachelor's degree in physics and math from Southwestern Louisiana Institute in 1947, a master's in education from Louisiana State University in 1951, a second master's in education, mathematics, in 1963, and a doctorate in education from McNeese State University in 1973. 13. DeBlanc worked in St. Martin Parish schools for many years and retired as a colonel from the Marine Corps Reserve on July 1, 1972. DeBlanc died on November 22, 2007, having given his country and the people around him his very best. In the vast Pacific theater of World War II, one of the defining battles for control of the Pacific Ocean took place on the island of Guadalcanal. Among the many unsung heroes who fought in the skies above this crucial battleground was Jefferson Joseph DeBlanc, a man whose courage and skill would earn him a place in aviation history. DeBlanc's exploits in the air above Guadalcanal epitomized the fierce, desperate struggle of the early stages of the Pacific War, as the United States sought to halt the Japanese Empire's aggressive expansion and secure a foothold in the Solomon Islands. DeBlanc's story begins like that of many other young Americans of his generation, a passion for aviation that would lead him into the heart of one of the most intense aerial campaigns of the war. His journey would take him from Louisiana to the distant reaches of the Pacific, where his heroic deeds would not only change the course of the war, but would also cement his legacy as one of the few aces to achieve 5 kills in a single day. Jefferson Joseph DeBlanc was born on February 15, 1921, in Lockport, Louisiana, into a working-class family. His father, a railroad breaker's son, instilled in him the values of hard work and determination. But from a very young age, it was the world of aviation that captured DeBlanc's imagination. He recalled a pivotal moment in his youth when a barnstorming pilot allowed him to sit in the cockpit of a plane. That brief encounter would leave an indelible mark on the young boy's mind, sparking a lifelong obsession with flight. As he grew older, DeBlanc pored over books and stories of World War I flying aces, memorizing their names, tactics, and the courage they displayed in combat. When World War II began to cast its shadow over the globe, DeBlanc saw an opportunity to fulfill his dream. The United States military was expanding rapidly in response to the global conflict, and the need for trained pilots was urgent. In 1939, DeBlanc enlisted in the Naval Reserve and began flight training under the Civilian Pilot Training Act. His training took him across the southern United States, from New Orleans to Corpus Christi, Texas. By May 1942, DeBlanc was a second lieutenant in the Marine Corps Reserve, ready to take to the skies. He was assigned to the 2nd Marine Air Wing in San Diego, where he would learn to fly the F-4F Wildcat, the Navy's primary carrier fighter at the time. Despite minimal training, just 9 hours in the cockpit of the Wildcat, along with limited survival and gunnery training, DeBlanc and his fellow pilots were soon dispatched to Guadalcanal, a place that would become synonymous with fierce